A desert is a scary place for me now. It used to be a place filled with peace and serenity. But since living out there for almost 30 years, you see things. This occurrence took place in the high desert of California in the early 90s. The whole town was once all military. There's a military plant there and a prison, and the streets to this day consist of numbers and letters. For example, Avenue O and 178th Street. You always hear stories of people missing in underground tunnels. Confirmed. In fact, a friend of mine kept getting a draft coming from his closet in his childhood home. Later, after he grew up, he checked it out and found an opening to one of these such tunnels. He called me over to check it out, but after I got there and we went through the opening, I was too freaked out to go more than 10 feet in when I turned around and told him this might be how people disappear. You always saw things late at night off in the distance, far past the lights of that then small town. Strange glowing, different coloured lights that would move around low or zigzag, then shoot straight up. We saw things in the sky, just stuff you never talked about. Life was pretty carefree back then. If you wanted to visit friends though, you'd have to drive down long desert roads, and sometimes end up coming home late at night in the pitch black because there were no streetlights. I remember coming home late one night with my boyfriend at the time and another friend, and we pulled over for some reason. Something compelled me to get out of the car and look up at the stars. We were in the middle of nowhere, but we could hear what sounded like machinery and muffled clanks like metal. We all started to look around, but we didn't see anything. Just then, we felt a vibration under our feet. I crouched down on the street and put my ear to the ground. It was coming from under us. We all listened intently and heard far down voices, but couldn't make out what was being said. We stood up and were discussing what it might have been, when we saw a small red light on the horizon, and it was getting closer. We piled into the car and got out of Dodge. We only told a few friends, and they experienced the same thing. A year later, I told a friend that I started a small hauling business. Still, there was a big job, so I needed to borrow a trailer. He said he had a few that I could use, so I should come out of his property to check them out. I was just starting to get dark when he pulled out his new toy. It was a military-grade night vision binoculars. He told me to wait until it got dark to leave, because he wanted to show me something creepy, and I was all in. Later, we walked towards the back of his property, looking out at nothing. No lights, no roads, nothing but a barren desert. He pointed the binoculars east, and oh my, there were people out there, coming out of the ground and moving around. I said, "What the hell am I looking at?" And he told me that his family called them ground dwellers, and that they are located in various parts of the desert. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. Needless to say, I never went to this house after dark again. At one point in my life, I lived in a mobile home park a little past Avenue F. There was a massive treehouse in my yard. It was left by the former tenant. The only way to get up into it was through a hole cut in the floor with a door on it, and under that was a rope ladder. One night I was sitting on the porch, drinking a cup of tea, when I heard something move up in the treehouse, and then a head popped up. It was a lady and her husband hiding. Clearly, I thought they were on drugs. I told them to come down from there, but they both refused. It wasn't until I threatened to call the authorities that they cautiously comply, looking all around, not wanting to be seen. By now, there's a small group of my friends and noisy neighbours gathering around. I saw that she was terrified by something, so I asked them to come in. I made them something to eat and waited for her to calm down. Then the lady reached in her bag and pulled out some papers, and they looked like legal documents with a government letterhead. There were drawings and schematics, and some of them even had embossed seals. I couldn't help but notice that they had water and smoke damage, and a few of them were burnt on the edges. She told me that they were checking out this place off Barrel Springs Road when there were 2 or 3 cinder block structures. I knew them well. A few years back I'd happened upon that place, and a black truck rushed down to greet me with guns drawn. She said the same thing happened to her, but she was in one of the structures, so she grabbed some things, and she and her husband ran. I went over these pages and felt very uneasy reading them, like this was stuff people got killed over if it got out. Stupidly, I said, "Why don't you just simply give them back?" She said they'd been running, and everywhere they stopped, a black car or van with government on no plate show up with darkened windows and just sit there watching them. Well, I didn't really want to get too involved, especially after reading what I did. I thought it was too big for little me. I will take what I saw to my death. So I packed them lunch and told them they could sleep in the treehouse for the night. They did, but they were gone early in the morning, before I woke up. After that, we started seeing black vans parked on our lonely road facing the house. At one point I even walked up to one of them, but they took off as soon as I knocked on their blacked out driver's window. Lots of unexplained things happened out there in the desert you don't see much of now. I think because there are more lights and people, well-lit towns and camera phones pointing everywhere. There weren't cell phones to call for help back then. I remember one time, a few years later, it was a fun day with some of my friends. We were in this stupid little red car called a Yugo that seemed to be on its last leg most of the time. My friend's uncle told me that there was a whole abandoned town far west of the Mojave Desert, and there were things just left there all over the place. We were so dumb. It took us a long time to get out there, and if you asked me to try and find it now, I don't know if I could. I wasn't driving. Thinking we were lost a few times, we started seeing things. A carnival ticket booth on a trailer, broken tractors and furniture, little shacks here and there, and empty water bottles everywhere. There wasn't a livable house or store or place of business for many, many miles. I wondered how anyone could even survive in a place like this. Then we saw it. It was a long and looked like single wide mobile home, if you could ever call it a home. It was between 60 to 50 feet long, and it was raised with the siding going all the way to the ground. It looked like something from a horror movie. It had several windows down the length of the house. Some of the windows had old frayed curtains that still hung up and blowing in the desert breeze. There were open sections of missing siding, exposing the darkness underneath the structure big enough to step or crawl through. Old but dusty cars with their doors and trunks open, trash and open cans all over the place, and a small fire pit in the middle of all this. His girlfriend and I saw people that seemed to not be wearing any clothes that we could make out, but their bodies were skinny and didn't move like ours. They were inside that house and were watching us from the windows and from the open spaces underneath. They were following us. As we slowly drove past, they went from window to window and open space to open space underneath. They were almost inhuman and had big eyes and pale skin, too pale for the desert. My friend, the driver, pulled up next to the fire pit, and despite us screaming to go, 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 he turned off the car. His girlfriend began to cry that we have to leave now. He didn't see what we saw. He said, "Stop, babe, this stuff is cool." Oh my gosh, I wanted to punch him in the face. We both kept looking at the people watching us, while begging him to get back into the car and drive. He picked up a long bone off the ground and started to push the soot around in the fire pit and said, "Hey, it looks like somebody cooked a dog." Just then, he looked up, his girlfriend leaned over to the driver's seat and grabbed his jacket in an attempt to pull him back in the car, when he finally saw what we were seeing and said, "Oh shit." The thing hiding under the house was swaying back and forth. His hands were on both sides of the opening, and he was staring at us with an intent to lunge. He tried to start the car, but it failed. Thinking that this is my end and Ethan in the desert, I began to beat on the back of the seat, screaming, "Please God, start." After 3 times it started. We tore out of there, leaving a cloud of dust. We pulled over from that location and tried to compose ourselves. Never again. Never again. We didn't talk about what we saw after that. I think we were in disbelief it even happened. There were so many crazy things that occurred in the desert back in those days. Too many to even come close to tell you. I know that there are things we do not or maybe will never understand. I also know that there are more eyes now paying attention, so I don't think it will be too much longer before we all know the truth. Just a tidbit of information, Rosamond way back in the day was a toxic dump site. That's why the houses were so cheap. But if you ask anyone now, they don't have a clue. It's currently 4:41 a.m. for me. I woke up a few minutes ago to adjust my blanket and briefly opened my eyes. When I did, I saw a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old, standing at the foot of my bed. In my half-asleep state, I remembered leaving my window open and thought a neighbour's kids got in somehow. I sat up and got a better look at her. "Are you a little girl?" I asked, and she smiled. But that was it. She just stood there and smiled. No child I've met would act like that in a stranger's house. And more importantly, no one would let their 7-year-old leave the house at 4 a.m. My next thought was that I was looking at something else, and my brain simply interpreted it as a child. But around her, everything else made sense. My fan was my fan, my bookshelf was a bookshelf, and there was nothing that should have been moving on the wall. Then I started freaking out. I pretended to go back to sleep and tried to wake back up. Even when I opened my eyes again though, she was still there, now looking at my bookshelf. I feel around the bed for my phone so I can turn on the light, but I felt my cat instead. And again, for some reason, I looked at the girl and asked, "Do you want to pet my cat?" She ignored me. I'm also an ex-Catholic, so my next thought was, Satan finally came for me. Like my mom says every time my room is messy. Rightfully freaked out, I closed my eyes and tried to wake up again, because as an ex-Catholic, I refused to believe anything that could have been scientifically explained. I could hear moving, but I decided to think it was rats. I kept my eyes closed and reached for my phone. I turned on the flashlight, shone it towards the foot of my bed. Lo and behold, nothing was there. Briefly, I considered that she went under the bed. And that was what was moving sounds I heard. But you know what? She can stay there. I sure as hell ain't checking. I might just chill here, petting my cat, who was completely unbothered. Back last year in the summer, sometime around June or July, my parents and I went camping, but they allowed me to bring a friend. There were 2 tents, my friend and mine's, and then my parents. They were close, but we were more into the trees. The campsite was decently sized. One half, the right, was next to another campsite, and the other side, the left, where our tent was, led directly into a very densely forested area. On about our 3rd day there, it was getting super late, and we'd had a long day, so we all decided to just go to sleep. Unlike the previous nights, my friend and I weren't really chatting for hours, just random little snippets, and my friends saying that they needed to use the restroom, but didn't want to use it this late. Later, both of us had pointed out how weirdly quiet the forest was that night, but didn't think too much about it. After about 30 minutes, my friend and I were on the brink of falling asleep, when we heard something brush against the tent. Neither of us questioned this, as we were right in the trees, and it was probably a raccoon. Not too long after, we heard brushing up against the tent multiple more times, all around too, sides, walls, even the roof. At this point, both of us were a little freaked out, but didn't want to use the words as to not alert whatever was outside, so we just stared at each other. Luckily, the sounds eventually subsided, and we were able to drift off to sleep. The next morning when I woke up, I left the tent and sat by the fire my parents had started. I told my mom all about the brushing against the tent, and she expressed it was probably just a raccoon. She had me convinced on that, until she told me something else. My mom frequently uses the restroom, and had gotten up super late last night and saw what she assumed was my friend, staring down at the tent. Thinking that my friend was going to get to the bathroom before her, my mom rushed to the restrooms, and when she returned, the person was gone. This thought unsettled me, but I didn't question it too much, since my friend did say they needed to use the restroom previously that night. Once my friend woke up, I asked them if they did end up using the restroom after all. They told me they hadn't. I then explained to them that my mom told me, and it left both of us very unsettled. Even if my friend did get up to use the restroom, I would have known. He would have had to walk over me, and I'm not a deep sleeper whatsoever. Have you ever wondered why we keep our eyes shut during prayer? Ever since I was little, I've wondered this. I mean, what's so important that we can't even look at it? For some backstory, I live in a rural town with less than 250 residents. We were all very close, especially if you knew each other from church, which was mainly the case. It's a very religious town. I grew up saying a prayer before every meal, and it wasn't until I was 6 that I started to question why we couldn't open our eyes. And there probably is something about it in the Bible. But truth be told, I've never actually finished the Bible, nor did I pay attention while reading it. For years, I asked my parents, but the only answer I ever got was, we're not allowed to see God listen to our prayers. And that answer never really answered my question. I mean, why couldn't we see God? Isn't that how people believe things? To see is to believe, right? When I turned 14, I decided I'd heard enough. Seriously, what was so bad about opening your eyes? If my parents wouldn't give me the answer, then there's only one other way. My siblings got the table set while my father and I finished cooking the food. We dished out the meal, and we all sat down waiting for my mother to finish her shower. Once she sat down, my father put his hands together, then the rest of us soon did the same. We all closed our eyes as he began, "Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for..." It was either now or never. I slowly opened my eyes to see my family praying. I was really disappointed, but at the same time, I don't know what else I expected. My father wasn't even halfway finished with the prayer, and I heard something. The rest of my family had no reaction, so I brushed it off as nothing. Once more, I heard the sound, but this time closer. I turned around to face the kitchen. Standing there, I saw a man, if you could even call it that. His face was thin, but at the same time bloodied and swollen. He had a thick thorn crown stabbing him, letting blood rush down his face. He had skin chunks hanging on by a thread. Lacerations covered his slender body. There were holes in his hand and feet. His heavy breathing drowned out the sound of my father. We made eye contact. I was paralyzed with fear. He walked closer, and the stench of rotting flesh surrounded me. He was maybe a few feet away from me when I heard my father say, "Amen," and the man was gone. My mother's voice broke me from my trance. "Are you alright, dear? What's wrong?" I turned back around in my chair to be met with my father's disapproving face. "Were you even praying with us?" I look at him, not even fully comprehending the question. "Well?" His voice became more insisting, but it still seemed so distant. At this point, everyone was looking at me. It didn't really faze me. I just remained silent. "Alright, if you're going to skip prayer and ignore your parents, you can go straight to your room." I got up and did as my father said. I headed to my room and just sat there. Why? Why did I make such an asinine decision? How was I supposed to know what I'd see? What exactly did I even see? The image kept flashing in my head, and the disgusting odour that trailed the grotesque figure. I had to be seeing things, right? Some type of hallucination? I mean, none of the rest of my family seemed to notice the being. Not too long later, my mother walked through the door. "Your father is very disappointed in you." I couldn't make eye contact with her. "I'm very disappointed in you as well." "Mom, I'm sorry, it's just no excuses. I want you to apologize to your father in the morning, and tonight, I recommend you apologize to God as well." She left the room before I could say anything. I sat there, alone in the dark, picturing the man that I saw, whatever it was. I didn't sleep very well that night. I couldn't get that image out of my head. At some point, I ended up falling asleep, but only to be soon woken up by my door creaking open. I was facing the wall and too afraid to face the open area. The sound of footsteps slowly approached my bed made me close my eyes as tight as I could. The world felt like it was spinning. I told myself that I was dreaming as the footsteps got closer. But then, it stopped. I began to relax my muscles. Then there was a drip on my cheek. I panicked. Fight or flight kicked in. I quickly turned on my back to be met face to face with the butchered man. He was leaning over me. I froze. My stomach began to churn. He slowly reached his hand to me. I screamed at the top of my lungs. My brother came bursting through the door, turning on the lights. And once again, the man was gone. There was a ringing all around me. I couldn't hear what my brother was saying to me. My body ached. I hadn't realised I'd been crying until I felt drops fall on my hands. The next day, my mother took me to the doctor. She did a quick checkup and found nothing wrong, but she did end up giving me a prescription to help me sleep. Then she sent us home. The car ride back was silent. When we got out of the car, my mother refused to look me in the eyes. I walked into the house and headed straight into my room. I sat on my bed, just thinking, I have to be going mad. This isn't normal. That's not real. It's just some figment of my imagination. It has to be. I laid down on my bed, just staring into nothingness. The texture of the ceiling put me in an odd trance, and I slowly drifted off into a deep sleep. I awoke to a dark room. I sat up, and just as I did so, I heard an odd cry, like an animal was in pain. The only thought that came to my mind was that it was my dog. Worried, I went to go find her. Once I swung my legs to the side of the bed, I was met with a disgusting, hot, mushy mucus-like substance on the wood floors. Startled, I bring my feet back up. I turn on my bedside lamp and look down. It was blood, and a lot of it. I look up once more, and that's when I see him, standing in the corner of my room, right next to the door. I become faint, and the world seemed as if it were closing in. His piercing glance made me feel too weak to even move. The odour surrounded me as he got closer. I pushed myself as close to the wall as I could, and squeezed my eyes shut. I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming. This isn't real. He's not really here, it's just a dream. I opened my eyes and his face was only mere inches away from mine. The thought of it being a dream remained in my head. That was, until he put his hand over my heart, and burning sensation overwhelmed me. Once more, my screams echoed throughout the room, sending both of my parents bursting through the door, and the man just vanished. My parents ran over to me, and their worried faces were the last thing I saw before I blacked out. I woke up to my mother patting a damp washcloth on my forehead when she saw my eyes open. Her expression changed instantly, and she gave me a hug. Still confused, I just lay there. Thank the heavens you're all right. You gave us a real scare back there. She smiled at me, which felt nice, seeing that she would look at me. Now, I know you just woke up, but your father and I want you to get some more rest. Here, take this. She handed me a pill, which I assume is the one the doctor gave us to help me sleep. She gave me one last smile before quietly saying goodnight, and then she left. Once she closed the door, my heart began to burn again. I could tell that my body was extremely stressed. My head was hurting really badly again, and once more, I got that strange feeling that happens right before he shows up. I sit up and prop myself against the wall. My heart starts racing, which is accompanied by the burn getting more intense. I hear cracks and pops coming from under the bed. Right after, he appeared. Nausea overtook me. The feeling wouldn't go away. My whole body began to hurt. Suddenly, I lost all control of my body and became completely paralyzed to the point where I couldn't do or say anything. My body felt as if it were on fire. I couldn't see anything, just the man. His dull, sunken eyes just stared me down. He crawled onto the bed and my lungs began to give way. My breathing became fast, and painful coughs escaped my body as the feeling of being crushed joined the mixture. My body shook violently as I began to cough an alarming amount of blood. The man leaned in closer. Everything hurt, and dread overtook me. The grotesque man leaned right into my ear and uttered out this one sentence to me. "You should have kept your eyes closed." My neighbour had just recently passed away. She was an old woman who lived on her own. She was very sweet, not a big talker. My brother used to do chores for her, and after he had not heard from her in a few days, he got my parents and my other brothers involved, because they were just as worried. She was found stuck under her bed, which had fallen on her. She was severely bruised, and had been stuck under there for a whole weekend. An ambulance was called, and she was sent off. Not too long after, she passed away from stage 4 pancreatic cancer that she wasn't aware about. Months later, I want to say around June, my sister and I wanted to be paranormal investigators. We were in the 5th grade and we thought, why not? We always heard sounds coming from her house, and we wanted to check things out. My sister, who I'll call So, got the video camera and started it up. We were in So's room, explaining to the camera that we were about to go and do. Eventually, we worked up the courage to head outside. Basically, all we did was record the house and explain all that had happened. I had the camera in my hands and remembered getting a really bad feeling. We saw the curtains move and panicked. Originally, we were thinking about going into the house, but we were now too freaked out to. I zoomed in on the curtain, waiting to see something, but it didn't come. The next thing that happened still scares me. So and I were talking, not really paying any close attention to the house at this point, when we heard a loud squeak come from the house. Both So and I saw a tall, thin, unhuman, shadowy figure quickly pull back into the house, and the door shut once more. We screamed and ran back inside. Our parents watched as we burst through the door, shouting frantically, but didn't care to question. But this did pique the interest of my older sister, Kay. So and I ran into our room and stopped the video. We took multiple deep breaths. Kay walked in asking why we were going berserk. We explained to her that we went to the neighbour's house to try and have some ghostly encounters. Kay laughed at us and left the room. So and I went to the previous videos folder on the camera, expecting to find our footage. But instead, all we found was whatever was previously recorded. Where was our footage? We'd made sure that we hit start. It was recording. I distinctly remember. So it didn't make sense why it was gone. There wasn't that much on the camera, so it clearly wasn't a storage problem. We ran out of the room and started screaming at our parents about what had happened. They didn't catch much other than the fact that someone was in the neighbour's house. We watched them get up and head out the door. We pleaded with them not to go, afraid they'd get hurt. They went around back because they had the key from my brother. About 5 minutes later, they came back and told us that the place was completely trashed. Things were thrown everywhere, stuff was burned, and they believed that either teens or squatters had invaded. My parents met in the late 80s, and they were both serving members of the military. Shortly after they met, both my parents were assigned to an Air Force base in Ontario. I was born there, and my brother followed shortly afterwards. Roughly a year after my brother was born, we were transferred to the province of Quebec. We were located in a highly francophone region, where my father had been posted to an army base. My parents decided to buy a house in a neighbouring town. It wasn't a luxury home, but I enjoyed my time there as a kid. We had a large backyard, which I spent a lot of time in. The history of the house is unknown to my family. From the looks of it, the house didn't appear haunted. It wasn't bent out of shape. It was just a 1970s/80s cookie-cutter house in an ordinary middle-class neighbourhood. I suppose this might be one of many visions of what a basic family home would look like in North America. In this house, at 3 years old, everything started. We were what I thought was an average family, but happy and in good health. Nobody had any serious issues. The family dynamic was awesome, and my dad was incredibly creative and fun. For the most part, we were good children. We did well in our early school years, and we weren't too spoiled, especially because we couldn't afford to be. But my mother did everything she could to pamper me and my brother. She wanted a good life for us. She would save her money to ensure we always had new clothes and shoes for school. She always taught us good manners, to treat all people with respect and not to judge others. Despite their eventual separation, they remained to be amazing parents. They always did their best to offer us a good life. When we moved to this town, my mother sacrificed her service to follow my father's. I believe it was a fluke that they were previously posted to the same base, because in the 1980s, career managers were not as accommodating to service couples as they are now in Canada. She decided to use this opportunity to raise her children and look after the home until we were old enough to look after ourselves. Once you entered the front door of the house, there was a small square area for removing your boots and hanging your keys. There were 2 sets of stairs directly in front of you, one to the ground floor and one to the basement. Below and directly to the left, there was a bathroom, and inside the bathroom on the left side, there was a small storage space. The space was large enough to kneel down and walk into, so my dad used the space to develop the film since it was dark and a secluded room. While the restroom was on the left, my room was on the right, which was beside my parents' room. I had a small window in my bedroom on the left side that had a partial view of our large, fenced-in the backyard. I couldn't see anything though, since the window was located high enough on the wall, and I was almost at the basement level. Plus, I was just a little guy. I vividly recall many details. My parents purchased my first bed for me when we moved into their house. It was lifted up onto a metal frame and painted bright red, like a maraschino cherry. There was always a railing that my parents later took off when I became older. It was between the ages of 3 and 4, but well before kindergarten, before I experienced something so impactful that it would forever be burned into my head until this day. Most nights, we probably went to bed between 7 and 8 p.m. We were familiar with the routine and we followed it. We had a very military style of discipline in our home. Not only were my parents in the military, but so were the previous generations in my family, and that culture carried on. We weren't perfect kids, but I like to think we were well behaved. One night, which looks identical to all other nights as a child except for Christmas, I awoke in my cherry red bed. I knew it was late because it was dark outside from my window, but not so late that my parents were asleep, because I could just hear them talking upstairs with the TV on. I struggled to fall asleep, so I lay down on my bed, looking around the room like any curious child. I was getting uncomfortable, so I turned over to my left side, which would have been facing the door to my bedroom. It was dark enough in the room, but I was in my room long enough for my eyes to be well adapted to the darkness at this stage. The only light I had from my room was the gentle backside of a faint porch light, and any ambient light from the moon, if any. I looked around the room, and then I began to draw my attention to my bedroom floor. It had passively piqued my interest, because I noticed that the area located directly in front of my closed bedroom door was unusual. I remember being able to look at the surrounding walls, but not that specific area for some reason. I kept watching the black mass, and I looked away a few times, still looking around the room. I looked back on the door, and in the confusion, saw an opaque black figure in the outline of a person standing right there. It was probably about 8 feet away or so, give or take. I wasn't initially scared, and instead I think I kind of giggled, thinking it looked like a person, and that some object in my room was obviously creating a very telling shadow of a humanoid. I kept looking into the shadows. I started to realize that something seemed strange. The shadow itself was not on the wall, it was off the wall, in the room, standing like a person and opaque black in colour. No light seemed to come through. It was not transparent. It was not translucent. It was a deep black hole. I was still confused, and I didn't put too much thought into it, so I kept gazing. In one moment, I was relaxed and intrigued as to what was causing the image in front of me. In the next, I was struck with paralyzing fear as I started to see the figure move towards me. It wasn't walking like a human, or something I even recognized on the planet at that moment in my life. There were almost no features. There was no face, but I could clearly discern the shape of the body, arms, legs, and so on. He resembled a man. When the shadow approached me, it didn't do so by walking. There was no fluid, human-like limbs moving around in a human-like or even earth-like fashion. The shadow would vanish, then reappear a step or two closer in a moment, as fast as a shutter can trigger on a camera. I didn't stop looking. I couldn't shout. I trembled, I cried, and I had my blanket set against my eyes. But I kept watching, as if it was a film. It continued to move itself towards me, disappearing, reappearing, disappearing, reappearing, until he stood right over me in my nightstand. I was petrified by that moment. With the speed, I threw the blankets over my head, and I buried my face as deeply into the pillows and blankets as I could without suffocating. It never left. My eyes were closed, but it made no difference. 3 of these shadows were penetrating their way into my mind, even though my eyes were sealed shut. These shadows were morphing vividly into horrifying faces, shapes, and grotesque images, all with the purpose of causing overwhelming fear. I could see them in my head. They were as clear as day. It was almost like they were telling me, "You can't hide from us." I felt them, taking great pleasure in my fear. It was very dark and sinister, and I couldn't get these figures to leave. I felt trapped, like a deer being surrounded by wolves. I could no longer bear it, as I knew I had no place to hide. Somehow, I had the courage to dash out of my room and scream for my parents. I remember running up the stairs to the living room, tripping on the way as I shouted, "Mommy, Daddy, I have a man in my bedroom." I was emotionally distraught, weeping, trembling, and hyperventilating. My mother did what I think most moms would do, and tried to reassure their kid it was just a dream and go back to sleep. I insisted on the fact that there was a man in my room. My parents took me back to bed, turned on the light, and said a prayer while leaving a holy crucifix underneath my pillow.